Welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about creating builder forms that allow us to delete entries within RackForms. Now, there's two main schools of thought here. There's the very simple automated way, and then there's the slightly more complex manually done way. We're going to take a look at both in this video. Of course, if you have any further questions about what you see here, please let us know at info@rackforms.com. Okay, so let's take a look at the simple way first. So the basic idea is I have a database, and in this case, it is a table called FB Demo. It's got some basic rows in here, and what I want to do is I want to first build a form that allows me to submit some records to that database. So very simply, I'm just going to create a form that allows me to submit a name and an age. And I'm going to submit that then to a submission page. The submission page is going to write those records to this FB demo table. Now, there's lots of different ways of doing this. I'm going to use the SQL Plus Automator here, and I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to make sure that the columns that I'm saving to have the exact same names as my existing database table. So notice lowercase n and lowercase a for name and age, because that's how the column names are defined right there. And then I'm going to change my table name to FB Demo, and I'm just going to say add an SQL Plus insert item. So now when we go through and we run this form, I'm going to call this insert 1, and let's say age 23, and let me do insert 2, age 24. And I could just kind of keep going through like that and keep adding rows into the database. But for here then, I have two records. Now, the reason why I've built this form, this isn't really the point of this particular video, is building these input forms, but just kind of show you real quickly that that's how we can get data into a form in a custom database. Okay, so now that we can insert data into the database, we want to pull it back out using Builder. Now, as a quick refresher, Builder, in very, very simplistic terms, when I add a Builder page to my form, I create a template. I can then use one of my template generators right here to take this query. In this case, I'm selecting all the columns from FB Demo, though I can certainly use the Visual SQL Query Builder to specifically select a subset of columns. So let's say in this case that name and age that I'm writing, and then I can just use one of my basic template generators right here to create a template that shows me the records from the database. So here you can see those two records that I pulled in last. Now, what's interesting and very useful about the way Builder does these template pages is that we can actually change these at any time to be different types of forms. So in this particular case, we're just showing records. Well, I actually want to create a query that deletes and shows records. So the way I'm going to do that is I could modify this, but I'm actually just going to start from scratch right here. I'm going to actually delete that current Builder repeater, and I'm going to add a new one. So step one now, we're getting into the proper content of our delete page. Step one is to toggle on the visual template editor and to select one of our delete templates from the list right here. Now, there are, again, two schools of thought when it comes to deleting records. There's multi-delete and single delete. They can actually be seen right here. So 3-column plus delete is the manual version. That's the more difficult one. We're going to take a look at that second. Or there's the multi-update. This is the more simplistic one. This is the one that we're going to do right now. Multi-delete. So I'm going to select multi-delete, and I'm going to click OK. Now, I will make a quick note right here. In older versions of RackForms, there is actually, unfortunately, a bug with this particular template. If you click on this guy right down here, you'll actually notice that there's a whole bunch of space in this line of text. Just go ahead and make sure that there's no space within this text right here so that the token looks exactly like this. If you don't do that, the token is not going to work properly and our form won't have a delete button. Again, this is only in older versions of RackForms. If you have a version of RackForms made after August of 2016, you will not have that particular quirk, so you will be able to ignore that particular instruction. Okay, so at this point now, I've added a delete template to my form. And if I actually run this right now, it'll actually show me the various columns that my table has right here. But if I do something like this, it doesn't actually work, nor can I select any rows to delete. And the reason why we can't yet get this to work is because we actually need to go down and perform step 2. So step 2 is to actually scroll down under user delete mode and set this to multi-row delete. Now, RackForms is actually going to go through and it's actually going to query the rest of our query right here to actually build the rest of the template query for us. And now if I actually go through, you'll notice now that I get this little check mark, which I can check, and I can now say delete record, and RackForms will delete that record for us. Now I do want to be very, very clear here of how this works, just so you can make sure that you get this right the first time as well. So let me actually start completely from scratch here and show that entire process one more time. So I'm going to add a builder page. To the builder page, I'm going to toggle on the visual template editor. And then under the insert template button, I'm going to select one of our delete templates, one of our multi-delete templates. So in this case, 3-column plus multi-delete. I'll click OK. Then I'm going to go to my query, and I'm either going to, if I'm just using the FB demo table, leave it the same, or I'm going to select the columns from my database that include the primary key column. It should be noted here that this process will not work unless our form has a primary key column set. In this case, ID is the primary column. The primary key column, you can see here in my database header, this ID field is the primary key. And so therefore, when I select, I'm going to say ID, name, and age. So that's what I'm going to select there from the table. So primary key column and any of the columns that I want to participate in this particular template. Now, at this point, if I run the form, as we saw previously, I'm going to get something that looks like this. I have a table that shows my records, but I do not yet have my checkboxes. And if I click delete record, nothing happens. And the reason why is because, like everything else in RackForms, it's modular. So we want to make sure that if you want to have delete capabilities, you've specifically told the system that that's what we want. And so to do that, I'm going to scroll down. Under user delete mode, I'm going to select multi-row delete. RackForms will fill in all these fields for us, so that all we should have to do now is just run the form and then select the item that we want to delete. And by the way, we could select multiples, and then I'm going to hit delete record. I'll get a prompt, and there we go. We've deleted that record. Now, that, as we noted in the beginning, is the simple version of doing this. And the reason why it's a simple version of doing this is there's a lot of stuff that RackForms did for us in that process. And we also have the added benefit of being able to delete multiple items at once. Kind of RackForms doing all the heavy lifting for us. However, there is a second way that I can actually perform user deletes, and that is by using single row deletes, where I actually write the SQL that handles the delete. Now, it should be said, this is a more flexible method right here, but it's also a bit more complex / a lot more complex, because we're actually in charge now of writing all the code to handle delete. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and once again start completely from scratch. I'm going to add my builder page, and under toggle visual template editor, I'm going to go ahead and toggle that on. And under insert template, now I'm going to actually select one of my 3-column plus delete templates. So not multi-delete, but just delete. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect and then change the columns or add columns, etc., that are involved in this operation. Now right now I'm showing the ID and name columns, but I actually want to add another column after this to actually show the age, because after all, we were displaying the age. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my token chooser right here, and I'm just going to add that age field in. So now let's just see what we get when we run this. So we get a listing of our fields and a delete button next to each one. However, you'll notice here that if I click the delete button, nothing actually happens. And again, RackForms is modular. The reason why nothing happens is because we need to specifically say, hey, if you want the incredibly powerful capability of going into my database and deleting records, you had better darn well make sure that you specifically wanted to enable that. In other words, RackForms is never going to make it possible to introduce this capability by accident, right? You will have done this on purpose. So it is very much a safety feature. Now, that said, in order to do that then, when we have the single row updates, is actually pretty simple. All I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have my bucket repeater selected, and I'm going to scroll down to user delete mode. Now, before we selected multi-row deletes, but now we're going to select single row delete. I'm going to toggle that on, and now I'm actually going to say what my delete SQL is. Now, we do need to know SQL to actually run this, and for the most part, it should be pretty simple, but again, if you don't know SQL, this is going to be a pretty big challenge. If you do, however, it looks a little something like this. I'm going to say delete from FB demo, the name of the table, and make sure I spell it exactly right, same punctuation, where ID equals ? question mark. And now this question mark is what we call a parameterized query. This is a prepared statement. So in other words, RackForms always make sure that you never pass raw SQL, but only variables to the SQL. So the question mark basically means I'm going to have RackForms give me some value that's going to be used as the runtime value for this right here. And to do that, we use a variable list. So I'm saying delete from FVDemo where the ID equals some value, where the value that I'm actually getting is going to come from the ID column. So I'm just going to select dynamic variable picker and select ID. Now at this point, I should have everything that I need to actually run this query. Now, before I delete any of my existing rows, I'm going to once again go in and add a sample entry here. And I'm going to add a second entry. And again, just put in some dummy data. And so I should be able to run my form here. And I should have all my delete records. And when I click this, RackForms behind the scenes now, remember this didn't work before, but behind the scenes, RackForms is going to go in, and when I click OK right here, it's going to say delete from FVDemo where ID equals the question mark. The question mark is going to be the value of the ID column. So ID right here, for example, will be 279. And so if I actually look at my record here, 279 is going to be this record. So RackForms will go ahead and it'll run that delete statement for me. It'll use the runtime value that we pass in, and we now have deleted that record. And again, just to see it one more time, delete this record. It's going to go through, and again, it's going to say, well, here's the SQL that I'm running. I'm preparing one unknown variable. The unknown variable, its value is going to come from the ID column. And again, I should be very clear to point out that the reason why ID is available is because I've actually selected that column right here. And when I click OK, it's going to delete that record for me. And then we, of course, could go on and on throughout here. Now, again, the difference here, and this is really important, is that here we're deleting single records, right? The first method that we saw actually allowed us to just check a box and hit one button to delete records. Here we're actually saying each record is going to get its own delete button. How you want to do this, of course, is completely up to you. This, I would argue, for folks that know SQL, is actually not that much more complicated, and it gives us a lot of power to do custom SQL. So maybe we have a really specific stored procedure we want to call. Maybe we have some more custom logic that we want to call. We actually want to join two columns together to use in our delete statement. We can do all of that crazy stuff here, but the only downside is that we're not able to delete multiple rows at once. So if you need to delete multiple rows and arguably keep your template a little bit cleaner, I would use the simple method. If, however, we need to delete single rows at a time, which might even be somewhat of a security item, in other words, we can't just let people delete all records at once, this may be a slightly better method right here. So anyway, I shall leave it at that. Any questions, comments, please let us know, info@rackforms.com, and thanks for watching our video on building builder pages that allow users to delete records.